Okay, thank you. So I'll start now. I do have some questions of the department, but given that you're here, I'll start with you. So pardon me while I... That's fine.
So these officers are departmental officers. They're not IESC, which are externals, but they
Right.
work with the IESC.
Thank you.
From the
And
Office of
hence
Water
the source
Science.
of confusion. So are the IESC appearing tomorrow or similar departmental officers?
Departmental officers.
Right. Thank you. So it was our original understanding.
Yes,
so
exactly.
look, I might try to ask some of these questions, but they were primarily directed at ISC themselves. So I was interested in particularly the Santos LNG project expansion in Queensland, which is a coal seam gas project that's been applied to be expanded and was the subject of extensive ISC advice, as many of these projects are. There was quite a lot of additional research work and data gathering that ISC had recommended Santos undertake. And I was hoping to ask ISC, but happy to hear if you can answer the progress of that work, who is undertaking that work and what timeframes are for that additional work.
So I think, Senator, your question's actually best directed to the relevant regulator. So the Independent Expert Scientific Committee provides advice to the relevant Australian government that's requested the advice.
And ask them to fill knowledge
and
gaps.
then it's for the government, Queensland government or the Commonwealth government in this case, to determine how it takes up and responds to the committee's advice.
Okay, is the committee ever tasked with filling the knowledge gaps that it itself identifies?
That may go to identifying research priorities. So the committee...
I mean for project-specific work.
The Independent Expert Scientific Committee has a role in providing the Commonwealth Environment Minister with advice on research priorities. So part of what will inform their research priorities is their experience in providing their advice to relevant governments.
Okay, so if a project, for example, the Santos one, is identified to have significant gaps in the information base that ISC advises the Minister of and recommends those gaps be filled before an approval decision is taken, is it ever the case that ISC themselves are then charged with filling those knowledge gaps, or is that the purview of the proponent under the direction of the Department or Minister?
That's really for the relevant government to decide who is best to undertake that
Sure, but
research.
does ISC ever get tasked with that job?
I'm not aware of an occasion on which it has been tasked to undertake the specific research.
Okay, so they're in charge of identifying the loopholes but not then filling them.
It depends.
Rather the gaps in
it
knowledge.
depends on what advice is requested of the committee by the relevant regulator.
Advice on project referrals under the EPBC Act.
Yes, or the questions may also come from the relevant state governments as well under their respective regulatory regimes. But it's really a decision for the relevant regulator.
Okay, and so I'm sorry, just to belabour the point, I'm asking whether the relevant regulator, in this case the Department of the Environment under the EPBC Act and the Water Trigger, has ever asked ISC to fill the knowledge gaps that ISC has identified in numerous project assessments. This is just one example. Who does the work? Are they independent, or is it the proponent that does the work, is what I'm trying to get at?
It's for the regulator to determine that, who does the work.
Yes, and in the past, what has the regulator determined?
Well, it would generally point back to the proponent to undertake that work.
Generally.
And then the proponent may engage a consultant to undertake that work.
Yes, and so my question was, has ISC ever been asked to undertake that work?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. Okay, well, I might attempt to pursue ISC questioning of ISC if and when we have them, given the limitations that we've just established. So, thank you for your brief time. Can I move now to the department, still on coal seam gas? Do we have the folk from the Office of Water Science?
I'm
You've got
Gail
two
Mills, the
hats.
Assistant Secretary
Great.
of the Office of Water Science.
Excellent.
So part of our function is to provide the Secretariat support for the Independent Expert
Okay,
Scientific
lovely.
Committee.
Thank you. So I'm interested in the long-term impacts of coal seam gas, and clearly there's a lot of concern about the long-term impacts on groundwater. expressed by a variety of bodies, including IESC, including the National Water Commission while we had them, including CSIRO while they had funding. Can you tell me who, if anyone, is looking at the long-term impacts of coal seam gas on the environment in government, if anyone?
So the Office of Water Science functions include undertaking the bioregional assessments. So the bioregional assessments would go to looking at the longer term impacts of coal seam gas on water resources. The other function undertaken by the Office of Water Science is to commission research projects, and those research projects are grouped under themes: hydrology, ecology, chemicals and cumulative impacts. And there are a suite of research products that have been completed or are being undertaken that would go to looking at the longer term impacts of coal seam gas on the environment.
Okay, can you
And
just
then
run me through the...
The third element of that is, of course, supporting the Independent Expert Scientific Committee to provide advice on individual projects on development proposals, and that goes to looking at the impacts on water resources.
Okay, thank you. Just on that first one, and appreciate you setting that out so clearly, the bioregional assessments, my recollection from previous estimates was they were moving quite slowly, and they'd begun in, well, frankly, a host of marginal seats, beginning, I believe, from memory, with New England. Can you update me on how they are progressing?
So the bioregional assessments are being undertaken in 6 bioregions, and the work is focused at the moment on the first stage, which is around collecting the relevant information, and that those products in that stage of being completed across many of the bioregions and areas for assessment, and those products go to providing baseline information on the ecology, hydrology, hydrogeology, and geology of the area. So that work is continuing to progress.
Okay, so just a few follow-up questions. Can you just list the 6 bioregions? Can you confirm for me that none of the approvals have to stop rolling out while those bioregional assessments are being undertaken? It's my understanding, but love if the government had changed their mind on that one. And who's doing that work?
So the bioregional assessments are being undertaken in 6 bioregions, as I said. Lake Eyre Basin is the first bioregion, and the areas of focus within that basin are the Galilee, Cooper, Paderca and Arkaringa subregions. The second bioregion is the Northern Inland catchments, and the areas for focus within that are the Maranoa, Ballon and Condamine, the Guida, Namoy, and the Central West, which is an area in Central West New South Wales, kind of the Macquarie catchment. The third bioregion is the Clarence Morton. The fourth bioregion is Northern Sydney. And that covers the Hunter and Gloucester subregions. The Sydney Basin, and then the Gippsland Basin.
Okay. None in WA?
No, they're focused...
they're mostly shale and type.
They're focused on areas of where there's cost, significant coal, coal seam gas and coal mining potential.
Thank you. And so of the research projects that have been completed and some that are still being undertaken, can you just share a little bit more on which ones they are and who is doing that work? Because I had previously thought that IESC themselves were doing that work. I think that was the intention when the National Partnerships Agreement was first entered into, in 2011 or whatever it was. But in most recent estimates, I was informed that actually no, IESC aren't themselves doing that work. So I'm interested in who is.
So I think one of your questions went to how many products have been produced so far, or what research has been done so far.
Yeah, if you're calling research projects products.
There are 20 products that have been produced under the bioregional assessment so far. So they go to the contextual information, if you like. So there are context statements, resource assessments. So the context statements I mentioned provide the baseline data. The resource assessments look at the region and identify all exploration and all production and all production going on coal seam gas and coal mining. So they set out clearly what the resource is and what the resource potential is, and then what activity is being undertaken in that area.
How does that interact with the setting of the baseline under your context statements, given that much of those activities had commenced before the so-called baseline was set?
Well, that work, the resource assessment will go to informing how the modelling is undertaken and informing what's being called the coal resource development pathway. So that will be what is modelled to determine what the potential impacts are.
So a baseline is going to be modelled. It's not a true baseline.
No, you'll have a baseline and then you'll have a change scenario.
Yes, and
So
my point is that the baseline...
the context statements and the resource assessment will go to setting out the baseline and informing the coal resource development pathway, which is what will be modelled to determine the changes from the baseline.
I understand the purpose of a baseline. My question is about when in time the baseline is set.
Oh, okay.
Given that much of those activities in Queensland...
Excuse me 1 minute, ladies. Can you just give me an indication how much longer, whether we break for,
the
or
break.
whether you're going to finish?
What time's the break
It
scheduled?
was due at 9 o'clock.
I was just getting going. I fear I may have a little bit more time to go. So if you want a break for tea, as long as these ladies are happy to stay
Okay,
until
I
after
do
the
need
tea
to go
break.
back to Senator Urquhart as well before we finish. So
Okay, well, I did only just start about 10 minutes ago, so I am keen to continue with this line of questioning.
Sure, we're more than happy to break if you wish to, and we will come back.
Well,
in.
I'm happy to keep going, but if you guys want a break, it's up to you.
What would you prefer? I'm happy to keep going. All right, we'll keep going. So 15, 24. Well, you're probably only going to get another 10 minutes anyway by the time we've had a break, and these ladies have still got some more questions. So if you can keep it to 15 minutes.
I will try to get through all of my questions in that time, but won't. Not
Well,
sure
it's
if
your
we
call.
will.
It
Thank
just means
you.
you lose, and reminding that you will lose questions in the next one, even though I know you haven't got that many.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Perhaps if we can
Yeah.
expedite your responses.
So I think, Senator, I'll take that question on notice. There is
Thank
a
you.
time set for
Yes.
determining which side of the
Thank you. It's a pretty important
baseline it
question
goes on.
as
I think
to
it's
the
2010, but I
validity
should
and the
clarify
utility
that.
of the baseline. Yep, thank you. Okay, can you ever so briefly run me through the projects that you said were still being undertaken but are not yet completed in that commissioned research projects?
Okay, yep.
Or point me to a web page where it's listed?
Yeah, so they're all available on the Independent Expert Scientific Committee's webpage.
Okay.
And there's about 20 projects, research projects that have now been published.
Okay, so
And
about 20 are done.
there are a few
and-
outstanding, and there are a few that we've recently commissioned.
Okay. All right, so IESC is doing most of those research projects. They're then doing the individual advice on EPBC projects. Who is undertaking the bioregional assessments?
That's led by the Bureau of Meteorology in conjunction with CSIRO and Geoscience Australia. It's drawn on input from natural resource management bodies in the relevant areas and also is being done closely with the state governments that have a role as well.
Okay, and I'll just confirm once more my understanding that the approval and assessment process for coal seam gas does not stop while this research work to actually understand the long-term impacts of coal seam gas is being undertaken. Those approvals are still being issued despite the fact that this research is underway. Is that correct?
So the approval, so as the relevant governments go about making their decisions, they're drawing on the best available science, and that includes the advice of the Independent Expert Scientific Committee, as well as the work that's being done on the bioregional assessments and what has been progressed so far, and also the research that's being done.
Okay, so given that research is incredibly important and the approvals and decision maker should really be armed with the best information before making potentially damaging decisions. What's the state of funding? Obviously, BOM and CSIRO have lost money, we know that. How about IESC? Has IESC lost money in either this budget or the last?
So the funding for the bioregional assessments and the IESC has been maintained, it's unchanged.
What level was it at? I recall it being quite low, but I haven't got the figure to
Well,
hand.
the initial allocation for the area was around 200 million, Senator, but that included funding provided for the National Partnership
It
Agreement.
did, much of which was doled out to the states.
It was paid to state governments upon completion of their milestones and,
Yep. So
and
how much does IESC get?
with reports of the COAG reform, relevant COAG review committee
Yes.
making recommendations.
Yes, I remember all of that. But how much does IESC get specifically to do all of this necessary research work?
So there's administrative funding that's provided for the Independent Expert Scientific Committee, and that has ranged from about 800,000 through to about $1 million. And as I indicated,
800,000?
ranges from 800,000 through to about $1 million each year. That funding goes to making payments to committee members and in line with the determinations of the Remuneration Tribunal, and funding associated with holding the meetings.
Do they get
Travel.
additional money to do the research work? Or is
Again, the IESC doesn't undertake the research per se, so their statutory role is to provide advice to the Commonwealth Environment Minister on research priorities.
Right, sorry, I thought we just canvassed this when you were talking about the research projects. So it's not in fact IESC that conducts those research projects, they just divvy them out and delegate them to whom?
No, it is the Office of Water Science that commissions the research projects. The role of the committee is to provide advice to the Commonwealth Environment Minister on research priorities.
And who's then doing the research?
So that varies according to the project. So it will be done according to Commonwealth procurement guidelines and, identifying those people that have got the best expertise to undertake
Okay.
the research.
So of the 20 research projects that you just said had been completed, and the remaining few that are still underway that are listed on the IESC website,
Yep.
but not in fact done by IESC, who did the majority of those? Are they all, geoscience, CSIRO, BODS, or?
Some will be Geoscience Australia, some is CSIRO, others are consulting firms like SKM, for example.
Some of it's private work. Is that all on the website or not?
On the published products, it's clear who was commissioned to undertake the work.
Okay. And that's on the IESC website, on the
Yes.
published products?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and so the bodies that, apart from private industry, the bodies doing that work are in fact the same ones that have had severe funding restrictions, mostly off the back of the last budget, but locked in on this budget. I'm concerned that they don't have enough resources to undertake that research in a timely manner, given that the approvals processes aren't stopping to wait while the research is being finished. Has anybody
Well, for
expressed
this
that
research
concern
that's
to
being
you?
undertaken, it's commissioned by the Office of Water Science and the funding is provided to whoever is commissioned to undertake the work by the Office of Water Science.
Right. And how much money do you have to dole out for that purpose?
So our budget there has been more than a few $1 million each year.
Okay. Can you be any more specific?
Yeah, I can perhaps take that question on
Okay.
notice and provide you with some further details.
More than a few. Okay. Less than 10 though?
Yeah, less than 10 generally.
I
yeah.
will, thank you.
Yeah, and it
accept
varies
the
from
figures
year
on
to year.
notice, but it's good to have a ballpark. Okay, thank you.
You mentioned at the start, or during the conversation, that the majority of the money went to the states. The national partnership arrangements, that there was 50 million out of that 200 went to the states, so it wasn't the majority. I mean, it was a sizable portion, but the majority didn't go to the states directly through the national partnership arrangement.
It wasn't 50 per state, it was 50 all up.
Total 50.
Right.
Or 49 point something. but
Okay.
roughly
Where did the
50.
rest of the 150 go?
I think that's where Ms Milnes has gone through.
150 and 10 is quite different.
But this is it's also over a number of years. So this is some
4
of this
years now,
that
yeah.
Ms Milnes was talking about was expenditure per year,
Okay.
as opposed to
Well, perhaps if you
over
could
the.
Thank you. Perhaps if you could also take on notice just to clarify where that 150 got spent. I've asked this before and I just can't remember what the answer is, so if you've got that to hand, that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, we can take that on notice.
And just continuing on that line, is anybody looking at the long-term downstream impacts on the Great Artesian Basin from coal seam gas extraction?
Well, those issues will be considered again as part of the advice the Independent Expert Scientific Committee provides on individual projects. So where it's relevant, that is often a question that's asked or an issue that's considered by the Independent Expert Scientific Committee. It's also work that's being done as part of the research that's been undertaken. So one of the research projects, for example, looks at the hydrogeology of relevant basins, including the Great Artesian Basin. And then where it's appropriate, it may also be an issue considered in the bioregional assessments. Okay, thank you. Well, look, I'll look into that further before asking some more questions on that. My last tranche of questions, thank you for your patience, Chair, is about the work that I'm not sure whether if it's Office of Water Science now or IESC or who is working in partnership with NICNAS to do the national assessment of chemicals used in CSG mining. So that's work that's being commissioned by the Office of Water Science, and that's work that's being undertaken by NICNAS as well as CSIRO, as well as the Chemicals Assessment section within the Environment Department.
Okay, and do we have them in 4.1 or, sorry, continue?
And Geoscience plays a role in an advisory capacity.
Okay, but Office of Water Science commissioned those folk to do that work. And sorry, what was the name of the departmental section, the chemicals?
The Chemicals Assessment section within the department.
And do we normally ask them questions here in 4.1 or elsewhere?
They'll be here for hazardous.
They'll be here late tomorrow. Okay. Oh, well, look, if you wouldn't mind, I'll persist and please respond to the best of your knowledge.
Tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you. The national assessment was originally due last year, and last time someone was able to tell me that it was that had been pushed out to about mid this year. Is there any further update on when that national assessment of chemicals and coal seam gas will be completed?
There's nothing in addition to what you've been advised, Senator.
So it's still on track for mid-2015?
The work's ongoing on it, yes.
Yeah, sure, but when is it due to complete?
I think as we indicated last time, we weren't able to provide a firm date around the completion of that. But we expected it would be sometime this year.
Okay. Well, why is it not possible to have a firm date?
I think what we indicated last time was that the work's ongoing and goes to the complexity of the project.
I'll be able to ask tomorrow, Senator.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, I have another commitment right at that very time. But anyway, I'll persist. The scope of that national assessment is, my understanding is it's limited to surface water and shallow groundwater, but not deep aquifers. I perhaps got the optimistic and hopeful impression last time that the work had begun with the shallow aquifers, but perhaps might progress to look at deep aquifers in future. Is that correct, or just wishful thinking on my behalf?
The focus of this work is on the impacts at the surface, including shallow groundwater.
Yes.
But what we indicated last time is that issues we were looking at was how you might assess the impacts on the deep groundwater.
And is there an intention to then assess those impacts after working out how you might do so?
That's still an issue that we're considering, and part of this some of the work in the current assessment that's been undertaken would inform that work.
So the decision on whether to look further into the impacts on deep aquifers will be informed by what you find about the impacts on shallow aquifers and surface water?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Is there any intention to expand that chemicals assessment to cover shale and tight gas, given the hydraulic fracturing process is similar irrespective of the gas that's being
The
mined?
focus of the work at this stage is on coal seam gas.
Is there an intention to expand that you're aware of as yet?
There's no intention to expand that.
Okay. So is there any work being done on shale and tight gas under any of those research projects or bodies that we canvassed earlier?
The focus of the work is around coal seam gas.
Okay. Because of the constraints of the water trigger.
That's the mandate of it's not so much to do with the water trigger, but that's the mandate of the Independent Expert Scientific Committee and the mandate of the funding, if you like.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that in last year's budget, the Office of Water Science was scheduled to be abolished as of 30 June next year. I hope that's not right.
I'm not aware of that, Senator.
No? Okay. Good. Well, I
Checking
hope
with the
that's
secretary.
genuine misunderstanding.
I think that's news
So
to everyone.
good. Well, I'm pleased. So the Office of Water Science within the department will continue at the same level of staffing with the same level of funding?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay. Well, that's the first piece of good news for the night. Thank you.
I think that's probably a little bit pessimistic.
Depends on your perspective. And that actually brings me to the end of my questions. Thank you very much for your help.